Hello everyone. This is Nitin Sridhar from Advaita Academy, and I welcome you all to another session of Global Festival of Oneness. In this segment, we have a very special guest, Sri K. Arvinda Ravji, and I would like to introduce you, speak to you a little about him. Sri Arvinda Rao is a retired Director General of Police, Andhra Pradesh, who has also published a book on tackling Naxalism. On the, on the front of Sanskrit studies in Vedanta, he studied Sanskrit under the guidance of Mahamahopadhyay Padma Shri P. Sri Ramachandrudu, renowned professor of Sanskrit. He studied Sanskrit there, and he studied Vedanta under the guidance of Swami Tattvavidananda Saraswati. His PhD thesis was on the subject of Jnanam in Upanishads. He has authored a large number of books on Gita, Upanishads, and many other Vedantic texts. And my personal favorite is one titled "How to Tell Hinduism to Your Child." This is a book that every Hindu parent must read. It is very helpful, and he has a long list of upcoming books as well. He has been an Acharya with Advaita Academy since its inception, and Sri Arvinda ji has received honorary title Vachaspati, awarded by Rashtriya Samskrita Vidya. He has received the title Samskrita Seva Vrati, which was awarded by the Rashtriya Samskrita Sansthan, and we can speak even more about him. There is no end. And Arvinda ji, we are very honored to have you here. We're very honored to host you here today. And with this short introduction, I now request you to start your session. Thank
ॐ श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानामालयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादशङ्करं लोकशङ्करम् ॐ. Good evening, friends, and thank you, Sri Nitin Sridhar, for the introduction, very generous introduction. And I also congratulate the Advaita Academy and also Sri Nitin Sridhar for having conceived this very commendable idea of celebrating this Shankara Siddhanta, Shankara doctrine, and this festival of oneness, in the name of Festival of Oneness. And this is going to be a sort of 1 month long series of talks by various people. And I am happy that, and in fact, I am thankful that I have been invited to speak on in this particular list of panelists. So today my topic is the relevance of Advaita today. So which means that I am supposed to justify, I am expected to justify the doctrine of Advaita. So this is what I'm supposed to do. And I would like to divide it into 2-3 parts. That is, first of all, I will explain what exactly is Advaita. And for doing that, I will try to examine how it differs from religion, how this Advaita Vedanta differs from an organized religion, and what sort of vision or what sort of understanding does this Advaita Vedanta give? That is another point. And how this Advaita Vedanta has influenced the Indian thought, Indian religion, and general outlook of an average Indian also. Even an average Indian, even a villager has got this Advaita perspective that is there in his blood. And how is this relevant for the present times? So this is the number 3-4 sections I will try to examine. The first point I want to take is how this religion and philosophy, they differ. What is the distinction between religion and philosophy? Religion means I am talking about an organized religion, which says, okay, this is what is the real God and whatnot. So religion is something which is started at a particular point of time in history by a particular person. Whereas philosophy is not like that. Philosophy is a sort of continuous quest for maybe reality. They make a very rational inquiry, very Shastriya inquiry, what we call in Sanskrit. And this religion is something which is started by a person, whereas philosophy is something which involves a lot many thinkers, several thinkers. And religion or theology is basically a belief system. Basically, I am telling you, I have got a direct communication from the God, and you are supposed to listen. And there is somebody called God, and then God is sitting somewhere in heaven on a golden throne, etc., etc. That is all a belief system. Whereas philosophy is nothing to do with belief. It is basically an honest, rational inquiry into the nature of truth. And as I said, religion is something where there is a dictation. I tell you, listen, and you can't argue. There is a hierarchy, and then you have to obey that hierarchy. Whereas philosophy, there is no hierarchy. There is a liberty to think. And this religion again is something which is relevant only to its followers. It is relevant only to its followers or adherents. Whereas philosophy is something which is universal. It can be Western philosophy or Indian philosophy, so long as it is a rational, honest inquiry into the nature of truth, it is acceptable. It has to be accepted by anybody and everybody. So this is basically the distinction between religion and philosophy in brief. And so let us see where this Advaita Vedanta fits in. And before that, I will let us see what exactly are its origins. The Advaita Vedanta, when we are talking about Advaita Vedanta, what are its origins? And as we know, the origins are from the Vedas, and particularly the Vedanta, the end portions of the Vedas, which we all know, which are called the Upanishads, and that is also called the Vedanta. So they are the sources for this Advaita Vedanta. It's not as though a particular person has started it at a particular time. Though Shankaracharya can be credited to have established this Advaita Vedanta on a very, very strong footing, he is not the founder. He is not actually the person who has discovered, who has started it, because this has been there for thousands of years, even from the Upanishadic times. And not one Rishi. He is not one Rishi. There are several sages, several thinkers. These several thinkers, we call them Rishis in our tradition. And these people are from several parts of the country, several parts of the Bharata Varsha in olden days. So that is the reason why we see certain small differences in terminology in various Upanishads also. And if I have to give an example, for example, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, if we take, we don't know, maybe about 4 to 5,000 years ago, if you just go back, if you shift the scene to about 3 to 4,000 years back, then you see the court of Yajnavalkya and the court of King Janaka. And in that court of King Janaka, lot many pundits, lot many scholars, lot many rishis, they are debating about what is the nature of this reality, what is the supreme reality, etc. And there we see that Yajnavalkya debating with several sages, and there is no question of say partisan attitude. There is no question of there is no agenda to establish a religion. It is absolutely a open discussion without any sort of agenda to establish a religion. That is one important point which we have to see about the Upanishads. And similarly, if you take another Upanishad, for example, Taittiriya Upanishad, I usually quote from this Upanishad very often, because there are certain very important passages in this particular Upanishad. Though, of course, not many passages are there in other Upanishads also. This is very convenient. So, for example, Taittiriya Upanishad, a son goes to a father. A father also is a sage. Son also is a jignasu, a person who is interested in knowing what is what. So the son goes to the father, and then he asks, "Oh, sir, you tell me what is you to explain to me what is this the absolute reality? What you are calling Brahman? Adhihi bhagavo brahmeti." Then the father says, "It is not as though I can just straight away tell you, and it is not as though you straight away realize. You have to think for yourself. You have to think." He says, "You have to think for yourself." That is tapasa brahma vijignyasasva. He also tells him, what is the equipment you have to think? You have got a body-mind complex. Annam, pranam, chakshus, rotram, mano, vachamiti. So he says, you have got an annamaya kosha, you have got a pranamaya kosha, you have got a manomaya kosha, and all these things, plus all this mind and all these things. That is the laboratory which you have, that is the equipment which you have. And with this equipment, you are supposed to think. And no culture says, you think and know about Brahman. Religion says, I am telling you, you listen. Whereas philosophy says, you have to think. And again, this father, Bhrigu, Varuna, Bhrigu Ruvai, Varunihi, Bhrigu is the name of the son, and Varuna is the name of the father. The father also gives the parameters, the framework in which he can think. What is the framework for that inquiry? He says, Yato va imani bhutani jayante yena jatani jivanti, etc., etc. Simply, in simple terms, he says, where from this whole universe is originating, and where is it existing, and where exactly it is getting resolved, and what is the cause for all that. So you think about it. So he gives that framework. And what is that highest reality? You have to think for yourself. You also examine yourself. You have got so many layers in your personality. You have got the gross body, you have got the subtle body, you have got the causal body, and in this subtle body you have got different levels. So he explains that, and then he says, you think for yourself. So then, what is that highest reality? So then, if you want to know what is reality, then what we have to do is we have to identify what is unreal. And by unreal, Vedanta calls it, what is unreal in Vedantic terms? Whatever is ephemeral, whatever is impermanent, whatever is transient is something which is unreal. What is Sat? Sat is something which is always there. And Asat is something which may be existing for some time and which will disappear. So from this point of view, Advaita explains that what all we see as this universe, what all we see as ourselves, it is something, it has got some tentative existence, no doubt, but it is all ephemeral. And if I can use certain Vedanta terms, so it tells everything in the universe has got threefold limitations, what is called a Trividha Paricheda. Desha Paricheda, Vastu Paricheda, Kala Paricheda. Desha Paricheda means, for example, I am now sitting here in this room. I am not in the other room. So I am limited by space. And I am also limited by time. I am in this particular period of time. I was not there about 100 years ago, and I will not be there maybe about 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. So that means I am limited by time. And I am also limited by being a particular person or individual. That is Vastu Paricheda. Vastu Paricheda, I am so and so, and I am not something else. So this applies to anything and everything in the universe, including the universe itself. The universe itself, we know that it has come into existence a few billion years ago. It was not there. And then again, it will not be there after a few billion years. So everything and anything is just coming and going. So that is what is existence. Not existence, that is what is Jagat. That is what we call the universe. Then what is the background, or what is the substratum against which all this is appearing? So that substratum against which all these impermanent things are appearing, that is what has to be the truth. That has to be the real truth. That is something which is beyond time, and Vedanta calls it Trikala Abadhyam. That is not negated at any point of time. Trikala Abadhyam, it says. And that Trikala Badhyam is not something which is an insentient thing. That Trikala Badhyam again is something which is of the nature of consciousness. It has to be of the nature of consciousness because consciousness is very, very primary. And that aspect also is explained in different other texts. So this is because each Upanishad touches on a particular aspect. One Upanishad touches on time, another Upanishad touches on consciousness, etc. And many other texts also. For example, Vidyaranya's Panchadashi logically explains how this consciousness is something that is the eternal thing. So this eternality of consciousness is something which has to be, that is something which is real. Whatever is Sat is also Chit. That is whatever is existence, that is also of the nature of consciousness. And again, this consciousness, how does it differ from our intelligence or consciousness? Our intelligence is of the nature of, I know certain thing. That is, I am the knower. There is something called known, and there is a process of knowledge. And when we talk about that supreme reality, in the case of that supreme reality, it is not something which is knowing everything. When we say that God knows everything, then we are actually insulting God. When we say that God or something, that highest reality is knowing something, we are saying that it is a limited entity. When I am knowing something, I am a limited entity. So that is the reason why I am knowing something which is apart from me. Because there is nothing apart from the Brahman. It is something which is infinite in nature. So with all this analysis, the Upanishads say, I am just telling only from one Upanishad. Other Upanishads say from some other points of view or some other points of view also. So the best definition for the supreme reality we find in the Taittiriya Upanishad, where it says, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. Whatever is Satyam is Jnanam, whatever is Jnanam is Anantam. That is infinitely existing consciousness. So that is what is Brahman. That is the supreme reality. So that is what the Upanishads say. So when the Upanishads say this, we now realize that Upanishad is not something something to do with religion. It is not talking about a particular god, which is, who is relevant to a particular tribe, to a particular people, etc. It is talking about some reality which goes beyond all these limitations of religion, etc. And it is something which is not a personal god. It is not somebody who is sitting in heaven, sitting on a golden throne, and putting his people, his followers in heaven, and his non-believers in hell, etc. Not that type of person. So then, according to Advaita Vedanta, I'll tell something more about this Advaita Vedanta before coming to the vision of Advaita. So what more does it say about the Jagat or the universe? The universe, how do you explain this universe? When you say that the God itself is that supreme reality itself is something which is infinite in nature, how are you going to explain this universe? This universe is explained as a sort of phenomenon or a sort of manifestation in that supreme consciousness. So consciousness is there, and that consciousness is manifesting as the universe which we see. So that is I will not go into the details about the logic which is used by the Upanishads in order to explain, arrive at this point. So the logic is rather elaborate. I will not go into that. So this whole universe is something which is a manifestation. So the consciousness is something which is manifesting as matter. And this is something which is also the question now, which is engaging the minds of the modern scientists also. Because the scientists also, there are two views actually. There have been two views. That is, one is whether consciousness is primary or whether intelligence is primary. There are people who say that intelligence is primary and intelligence is appearing as matter. There are people who say that consciousness is primary and consciousness is appearing as matter. So that is what we see here. But Upanishads say that consciousness is primary, and matter, as we see, is something which is a phenomenon. And Advaita Vedanta, as I said, it also says you have to analyze yourself. What is called the jiva? The jiva is somebody who is also a product of this universe only. If you conceive or if you think of the universe as a macrocosm, this jiva is only a microcosm, and every bit of this jiva is drawn from that macrocosm only. Tatha pinde, tatha brahmande. So that is, or vice versa also. So that is what we see. So we have to examine the examiner. We have to observe the observer in Vedanta. Vedanta, the most interesting point is, in science also, the science, you are observing the external universe, whereas in Vedanta, you are observing the observer. So that is one important thing. And this investigator or jiva, let us say, this jiva realizes, and that again, the same Upanishads, if we see, this jiva realizes that is by discarding what is not his real self. The process is what is called negation. In that process of negation, he discards what is not his real self and realizes that his essential nature is not much different. Is not different from what he calls that supreme reality or that infinitely existing consciousness. So this then what about this body-mind complex? This body-mind complex is something which is a sort of tentative outfit, which I have got, and Vedanta calls it a upadhi. Upadhi, it comes and goes. It is something which is ephemeral in nature, which is very, very transient in nature. So that is what we see in brief. That is what is the Vedanta philosophy. when we say that this is the what the Vedanta says, we are now very, very clear that it is not something which is something like an organized religion which says, yes, this is what is God, you have to believe in this, etc., etc. What all we discussed till now is a very, very brief representation of what Vedanta says. And this Vedanta is something which can be examined by anybody. And the Vedanta also says you can be the Brahman, you can be Brahman. Of course, I'm coming to that later. So that Vedanta is something which can be validated by anybody. It can be experienced by anybody, and it is something which differs from religion. That is the important point which we have to see is that Vedanta, it differs from religion, but it has influenced the Indian religions, we can say. The Indian religions, I am using a plural, because we have got Vaishnavas on one hand, Shaivas on one hand, and some other people. Of course, I may not be exactly, I may not be totally correct to use that plural, but there are so many traditions, if not religions, there are so many traditions in our religion, Vaishnavism, Shaivism, some other Shakti, etc., etc. And because the Advaita Vedanta, the Advaita vision is that, the Advaita, not realization, the vision is that the supreme reality is of the nature of that infinitely existing consciousness. Then whatever name or whatever form you visualize for what you call a God, at the level of religion, you need a God. So at the level of religion, okay, you call the same supreme reality as Vishnu. And some other people call the same supreme reality as Shiva. Some other people, they call the same supreme reality as Devi or Shakti or something. So like that, you have any name and form. All names and forms are accepted in Vedanta. The one thing we see is whatever name and form we see, they are accepted. Because the religion in India is impacted or it has grown under the umbrella of the Upanishads. So that is what we have to see. Religion in India has grown under the direct influence of the Upanishads. So the Upanishads, when they say that reality is one, then there is no problem accepting any name and form. So we have got two levels. From what I say, if you just closely see, I am talking about a reality or a God with a name and form and certain characteristics like ruling the universe, and then he is the Srushtikarta, Srushti, Sthiti, Laya, Karaka, etc., etc. So at that level, you are talking about one thing. At a higher level, you are talking about what is called supreme reality, which is not connected with any of these things. So thus in Vedanta we are talking about two levels of reality. The higher reality is something which cannot be denied or negated by anybody, which is universally applicable. And a lower level of reality, you call it religion. You can call it Vishnu, call it Shiva, call it anything, and it is applicable to other Western religions also. You call it any name by give any name to that God. They are all at a lower level of reality. So that is the reason why, and of course Vedanta gives the two names called Saguna level and Nirguna level. Saguna is the God with a name and form, and Nirguna is the highest level. So from this point of view, we see that Shankaracharya he examined various traditions. He examined various traditions of his time, and then he criticized, rather he censored certain violent traditions which involved things like self-mortification and human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, etc., etc., etc. And he established six dominant traditions of his time, and that is the reason why he is called Shanmata Sthapanacharya. Shanmata Sthapanacharya. From that only, even now, even in South India, we have got this tradition of Panchayatana Puja. Though Shankaracharya, of course, Shankaracharya is told about Shanmata Sthapanacharya. He is called Shanmata Sthapanacharya, but this Panchayatana tradition also has come from him. So this is what we see about the impact on religion. And then we see the impact of this Advaita Vedanta on an individual. What is the impact of this Advaita vision on me? Of course, I can study texts and then I can be very articulate about the philosophy at a very intellectual level. but I may not be imbibing it, I may not be living it, I may not be internalizing it. So the real purpose or the message, what Vedanta, what Upanishads tell is that it is not a sort of intellectual exercise. You are supposed to undergo some internal purification. Vedanta is for the internal purification of a person. And the person has to evolve. He has to evolve and then he has to grow out. He has to transcend all the limitations and all the say whatever we call the limitations of his identity. For example, I have got a social identity. I belong to a particular maybe religion. I belong to a particular caste. I belong to a particular something else, some profession, etc. So all these identities they disappear. All the identities they have to disappear. What we call the so-called ego. That so-called ego has to totally disappear. Really enlightened man, the ego has to totally disappear. That means what will happen to that ego? That the ego is somewhat like a salt doll. Vedanta teachers, they give the example of a sort of salt doll which merges in the ocean and loses its identity. So the individual has to merge his ego in the ocean of consciousness, in the ocean of that Brahman consciousness. So that is what Vedanta expects. So that is the meaning of Aham Brahmasmi, Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati, etc. When we say Aham Brahmasmi, it is not an egotistical statement. When I say Aham Brahmasmi, I don't mean that I am Brahma and then I am such a learned man and you are all ignoramus. Yeah, plural of ignoramus, I don't know. So you are an ignoramus. It doesn't mean that. Yet it only means that this that in the ego, the individual ego is totally obliterated. That is what it means. So that when we say Aham Brahmasmi, it is not an egotistical statement. That is one thing which we have to see. Then again, that is why we also say Brahmavit Brahmaiva Bhavati. A person who realizes Brahma, he becomes Brahma in the sense that he is as neutral, as impartial. He rises above all these limitations. And his ego, what is his ego? What is the definition of this mind? The mind's definition again is given in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It tells Kamas, Sankalpo, Vichikitsa, Dhrutihi, Adhrutihi, Rir, Dhir, Bhi. It is a long sentence. It says, what is this ego? Or what is this self? What is this mind? Mind is a bundle of impressions, bundle of desires, the will, volition, love, hate, and all notions like I, mine, etc. So all these notions, they just disappear. So it's a very long process. It's very easy to say, but then really living this Vedanta is something which is very long process. So that is the reason why in Vedanta also we find very few examples for this Brahmavit Brahmaiva Bhavati. So that is the impact. If not, if everybody is not a jnani, at least we are on that path. At least some amount of purification, it definitely gives. So that is what we have to accept. A person may not be a Brahmajnani, but at least some amount of purification it gives, some vision, some change in the vision, it is guaranteed. Then we have to come to the question, how is it relevant to the society at large? And as I said, this Advaita Vedanta is something which has influenced our religion. And even at the common man's level in India, there is that spirit of tolerance. A common man is actually a learned man may not be an Advaiti. A learned man may be a Vaishnavite, he might be a Shaivite, he may be following this, that, etc. A common man, he is somebody who says, yes, God is there in everything. He goes to Tirupati, he goes to Kashi, he goes to some other place. A common man is somebody who has that that actual, he has absolutely no discrimination, and then discrimination in the sense he doesn't discriminate. No, this is higher, this is lower, etc., etc. That sense of tolerance and sense of acceptance is very much there. So this when Vedanta says that supreme reality is one, and you can have any number of names and forms, that is the basis for all tolerance. And in fact, what we call tolerance, religious tolerance and acceptance and all these modern things, they are not something which are given by the West or anybody else. It is actually it is the contribution of Indian philosophy to the West. That is what I feel. because we are told about what is called the 18th century Enlightenment. And what is the background for this 18th century Enlightenment? Because the West came in contact with India, the entire Indian knowledge. And all these ideas about this liberty, fraternity, equality, just see the background of all these Western philosophers. They all very deeply studied Indian philosophy. And this what all these liberal ideas, there is all drawn from the Upanishads only, all these ideas about equality, etc. In fact, we have not done a lot of study. We have not made any great assertions on that particular front. So Advaita is something which has influenced our religion, and this is something which has inculcated that spirit of tolerance in us, and that is something which nobody can deny. And not only that, we see the thought leaders of Advaita. Who are the thought leaders of Advaita? They are the same people who are also our religious leaders. For example, to take some names, for example, some Sringeri Peethadipati or Kanchi Peethadipati or some other Peethadipati, all these Peethadipatis and Swamijis, they are the thought leaders. And they are also the leaders of religion. And what is the speciality of these people? These people, they have never misguided their followers. They have never told their followers, no, no, you go and convert all the people. Their Vedanti never says you go and convert all of the people into our religion. Because this man, he looks at religion at a lower level of reality. And his mind is at a higher level, much higher level, above all these religions. Ativarna Ashrami, a jnani is somebody who goes beyond this Varna Ashrama religion, Etra Veda Bhavanti. So he is at that level. When he is at that level, he is not a man who is misguiding. He will never misguide. Our Swamijis can never misguide the common man, and they will never say, "You go and convert these people, and use all your guile and all your methods, etc." So they will never say all these things. And I feel that we can say that Vedanti is the only person who can stand in front of God without any guilt. If God were to come and make line up all of us, a Vedanti can stand without guilt because we have not done any of these aggressions on mankind. We have not gone and then we have not used pressure, we have not used violence, we have not converted people. If at all Vedanta says something, you convert yourself. You convert yourself into what? Convert yourself into God. So you convert yourself into that level of God. So that is what Vedanta says. So this is what we find, the impact of Advaita Vedanta at the individual level and also at the social level. So this is what we find. And to just make some concluding remarks, I want to say that this, not only me, everybody has said, in fact, Vivekananda very magnificently, he said, Vedanta is going to be the religion of the future, that is the foundation for world peace, etc., etc., he has said. So this is what we have to speculate, we have to deliberate on that. Vedanta, it is actually the foundation for the world peace, because all religious wars which we see in the world, all religious wars are basically due to the exclusivist claims which they make. All I am the custodian of reality. My religion is the only true religion, and this has to be spread all over the world. And the religion and the state, they are coming together. Religion and state coming together and then trying to expand. It's a sort of religious, we can say, imperialism. And this is what it is due to ignorance only. Because basically they think that a person thinks, a religious person thinks, yes, his religion is the most, it is the superior religion. And certain religions, they also say, yes, if you follow my religion only, you will come to heaven, otherwise you will be in hell. And if you see, for example, in Christianity, there are different levels of hell, different degrees of hell. And even people like, according to them, very great people like Socrates or Aristotle and all those people, they are also in hell, but they are in a slightly benevolent form of hell. So that is what they say, in a slightly lower level of hell or the benevolent level of hell. And probably they will put Shankaracharya also in that benevolent level of hell if it is permitted, if permission is given to them, theologians of that particular religion, they will put Shankaracharya also in that benevolent level of hell. So anyway, but Vedanta never does it. Vedanta is the only philosophy which does not want to eradicate any religion. We accept all things at a lower, we accept all people, not as absolute truth. Religion is accepted as a very, very useful means for purification of mind. Religion has to be used for purification of mind and not for aggression. So that is what Vedanta says. So this is what we have to see. And in this background, what is our role? What I feel is, we feel very, very sad to see. We feel very sad, and it is very ironical to see that the most tolerant culture in the whole world, it is being blamed as intolerant. Even today, I was reading one somebody something some forum for religious freedom. So those people, they say that, oh, India has to be blacklisted on the plank of this religious freedom. So this is something which is atrocious. This is atrocious, and this type of propaganda is going on against our culture only because we have not sufficiently advocated, we have not sufficiently highlighted what exactly is our philosophy. Even many, it is very sad to see that many of our commonly educated people, our university educated people, even they do not know the fundamentals of our philosophy. If we all know the fundamentals of our philosophy, fundamentals of Vedanta, we will really hold our head high, and we will have some self-esteem. We will also tell people, and in fact, all our own people who are going and maligning our own culture, such people will come down. Maybe some paid people may be doing it, may continue to do that. But then we will be able to guide the whole world. In fact, if we bring this Vedanta, if we bring this Advaita Vedanta to the mainstream, in fact, Advaita Vedanta is the mainstream. And unfortunately, that mainstream is forgotten, and then we think that, okay, we worship so many gods, and then even learned people, they think that we have got 33 crore gods, etc., etc. So many misconceptions about our own philosophy. And that is also giving rise to certain social, what can we say, the so fault lines in the society. So these things, they will be eradicated. They will just disappear if we bring this Vedanta perspective to the mainstream. And as educated people, I feel that it is our duty to not only study, to propagate, to live, try to live it, and try to propagate it, and see that this culture, this great philosophy will contribute to world peace. So definitely, we can again conclude by using the words of Vivekananda that this is the foundation for world peace. So with this, I again congratulate the Advaita Academy for giving us an opportunity to celebrate Shankara's philosophy. And coming to Shankaracharya, Shankaracharya is one person, though the various ideas are there at a rather in a disjointed fashion in various Upanishads. Shankaracharya is the man who brought them together, and then that brought that Ekavakyata in so many places, whether it is Brihadaranyaka bringing out that Ekavakyata, then again that what is this Brahma Sutra Bhashya, all this was a massive exercise. So we have to be we have to be highly grateful to Shankaracharya. Had Shankaracharya not been there, we do not know how this face of India would have been. So we are again, we can conclude by paying our salutations to Shankaracharya. Hari Om, Tat Sat.
Thank you, Arvindaji. It was a very enlightening lecture. And we have some questions from the audience. So I will be reading out the question to you so that you can answer them. Here is a question from Anuradha Chaudhary, and she says that you have in your lecture you use the term religion for Sanatana Dharma, uh, but in the normal understanding, religion is usually used associated with belief-based systems, whereas the dharmic traditions are fundamentally experience-based ones, leading to very different implications in the attitudes of respective practitioners. So, can you please comment on this?
Yeah, of course, our question is relevant. I did not use the word Sanatana Dharma because Sanatana Dharma itself does not include the Vedanta. Sanatana Dharma, though we say that Sanatana, what is the meaning of Sanatana? Sanatana means eternal. Sanatana, Sadatana, says Amarakosha. Sanatana does not mean ancient. Sanatana means eternal. Eternal Dharma. Eternal Dharma Yes, it indirectly includes a certain vision of life, certain philosophy of life. And dharma is something which is dharana, the dharma uchyate. That which holds, that which sustains, that which keeps the society together is what is called dharma. So this Sanatana Dharma, by implication, it talks about some sort of thought system, and by implication, it implies a particular philosophy which is going to unite the society. That, of course, that can be used. But unfortunately, in practice, what we see in religion, in India also, in practice, that Sanatana Dharma is not actually practiced by us. We have forgotten that Sanatana Dharma, and we are actually following a religion. We are just kind of going through various rituals in a very mechanical manner. So that is why probably the Sanatana Dharma could have been used. There is nothing wrong, but somehow I did not use because the time also is limited. And if I use that dharma, that word, I have to again explain that word. Yes,
Uh,
please.
we have another question, and it is: do you think it's the acceptance of all religions which is leading to subjugation of our freedom from here, leading to impurity in our own minds?
I didn't get it properly.
Okay.
Do you think that
The question is
all religions, do they subjugate the
no, no,
individual?
no,
Mm.
no, no. The question is, it is the acceptance of this notion that all religions are. I believe that is what they are saying, that all religions are equal or all religions are same. Is it this acceptance of this maxim that is leading to all kinds of problems?
Yeah, I don't think that all religions are the same because many people say, even our own people say, Sarva Dharma Samabhava, etc., etc. Some people say, but I don't think all religions are equal because the Western religions or the Abrahamic religions, they are based on the revelation of a particular person. They are based on the individual, a particular individual, what he says, and then what he says is the absolute authority, and then you can't deviate from that authority. Whereas the Indian religions have developed under the umbrella of the Upanishads. So Indian religions or Indian religion, let us say, Indian religion where we are worshipping Shiva, we are worshipping Vishnu, we are worshipping Rama, etc., etc. So Indian religion is something which is influenced by the Upanishad, and it is something which is totally on a different footing. It is not on the same footing as Christianity or Islam or any other religion, where they are exclusivist religions. Whereas we are not an exclusivist religion. Even Indian religion also, even at the level of religion, we are not an exclusivist religion. We don't mind keeping a figure of Jesus Christ or somebody. We don't mind. Whereas they do mind. I have no quarrel with their God, but they do have a quarrel with my God. So we are definitely at a higher level. There is no doubt about it. So that is the reason why I feel that why I say that some people say maybe political people may say, but as real students of philosophy, we need not say because we are not obliged to say that. We are not obliged to say that all religions are equal. Some politician may say, or some other people for goody purposes, maybe even in meetings, etc. Some people may say, but real student of Vedanta need not say that. We can tell facts. We are definitely different. We need not say we are superior. We are at least different.
And we have a question on Vedanta. The question is, do you think that the concept of adhyasa is on two levels?
Sorry,
Primary
concept of
adhyasa,
adhyasa, adhyasa.
adhyasa,
Okay.
yeah, is on two levels, primary and transcendental.
Adhyasa at two levels, primary and transcendental. Yeah, that is not exactly, maybe then somebody might have put it that way. What you said, it is called avidya and ajnana. At the level of jiva, it is called avidya. At a higher level, it is called ajnana. So that is what at the level of Ishvara, it is called ajnanam or maya. At the level of jiva, it is called avidya. So both are adhyasa. At the level of Ishvara also, whereas Ishvara is not maya adhina. He is not under the control of maya, whereas we are under the control of avidya. We are
So,
influenced by avidya. So that is what That is how probably what you call adhyasa is at two levels. I have not come across this term which you said adhyasa is at two levels. But from what you say, probably he is referring to this avidya and ajnana. Avidya at the level of jiva, ajnanam at the level of ajnana or maya at the level of Ishvara.
One more person asked whether the essence of Vedanta can be simplified in 3-4 statements or 5 statements. What would it be?
Essence of Vedanta. Essence of Vedanta, if you want, Sarvatma Bhava, that is one term which Gita uses. Sarvatma Bhava. The essence of Vedanta is you are there is only one. For example, non-dual, when you say non-dual or Advaita, yeah, I forgot to explain this word Advaita. Advaita means what is it? It is not monism. When you say monism, monism means there is only one God. Of course, that God is supreme and I am his servant, etc., etc. So God is there, I am also there, universe also is there, that is monism. Whereas our Advaita is not monism. Our Advaita means non-dual. Apart from that supreme reality, what we call conscious, that Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, nothing else exists. So when nothing else exists, when we define Brahman as infinite, I am not apart from that infinite. When I become apart from that infinite, I become zero. And when I say that I am also there and Brahma also is there, then I am actually insulting Brahma by making him a limited, by making it a limited concept. Brahma is not limited. When I say Brahma is infinite, I can't be away from that thing. So if we want to say that define Advaita in very, very few terms, we can say number one is Jiva is not different from Brahma. That is one. And Sarvatma Bhava, that is the consciousness or Atma which is present in you. It is the same consciousness which is present in everybody, everything, every entity. Shunichaiva, Shvapakecha, Panditas, Samadarshinaha. You have to see Brahman, you have to see that divinity in everyone. And when you see divinity in everyone, automatically you are looking at everybody as your own self, and there is an unconditional love. It is not a sort of missionary love, but it is an unconditional love for everybody, for all the beings. So that is the result. You have got the unconditional love which flows, and then a person who becomes, who transcends all limitations of religion, etc. A real jnani, a real Vedanti, will not talk like me. In fact, right now I am talking like an advocate for Advaita Vedanta. A real jnani may not talk like talk like me. A real jnani will be transcending. He will talk at a more mature level. He will not even refer to Abrahamic religion or some other religion. So to tell very, very briefly that he becomes an Ativarnashrami, he transcends all limitations and he becomes equal to God.
We have one doubt from one of the audience. He says, I did not understand how Sanatana Dharma does not include Vedanta philosophy.
Yeah, Sanatana Dharma, I said only by implication because Dharma is different and Vedanta is different. You see, Vedanta is a philosophical, is a rational, is a sort of intellectual quest. Not only intellectual quest, it is a rational quest into the nature of reality, isn't it? Whereas Dharma is something which is something to do with the organization of the society. Dharma is something to do, Dharanat Dharma Uchyate. And there is a big definition for Dharma. If I have to quote a line from Mahabharata, it says, Vidvadbhis Sevita Sadbhihi Nityam Advesharagibhihi. There is a long shloka. The meaning of the shloka is that Dharma is something which is accepted by highly learned people who are dedicated to truth. Vidvadbhis Sevita Sadbhihi Nityam Advesharagibhihi. Those who have transcended this raga, dvesha, etc. And that is something which comes from the bottom of their heart, not something to do with lip sympathy. Hrudayenabhyanugnataha yo dharmastan nibodhata. There is a definition for dharma. So that dharma has something to do with society and social organization, social structure, etc. So Sanatana Dharma is definitely influenced by Vedanta. That much we can say. But Vedanta does not become part, and we can say in a way of speaking, we can say that Sanatana Dharma includes Vedanta because without Vedanta, this understanding will not come, isn't it? Sanatana Dharma itself is very liberal. It is something which is inclusive in nature. It doesn't make any exclusive claims. So all these things are there.
I have a few questions of my own. based on what you said. And one of them, one of the even audience has asked this: how can we introduce Vedanta into education system? So my question I would add to it is, how do we teach or expose our children from a young age to Vedanta? I mean, do you have any tips or suggestions on how to go about
I think it may be very futile to expect government to do anything. It is very futile to do because the governments, they are helpless. They are totally helpless. And only we can do in the sense that, for example, Amar Chitrakatha, you take the example of Amar Chitrakatha, they have popularized all our itihasas and Puranas. So something like that. All educated people, all people who are interested in Sanatana Dharma, we have to popularize Gita. So Gita has to be brought down to the level of a child. The concepts, certain concepts, they can be definitely told even to the children. For example, that supreme reality, what is that supreme reality, which is of the nature of that pure consciousness, etc. And also, God is something which is a name and form. It can be any name and form. And things like this religious tolerance and things like that. They can be told to anybody. They can be told to even high school children also. It can be told. So Vedanta can be simplified because Vedanta is basically a rational approach to reality. It can be told in simple terms, and that is what we have to aim at.
You spoke at length about religious extremism and how Vedanta is a higher philosophy than those ideologies which propagate extremism. And but currently we are seeing that um, our Hindu civilization, which wherein the Vedanta is at the center, so to speak, is being under attack from all the sides. So, how can we counter this attack? How do we protect the higher philosophy? Does Vedanta provide any framework or direction or something that what individuals can do to protect itself, to protect our philosophy and the fight against this extremism?
Vedanta does not directly say anything because Vedanta is basically pure philosophy, basically an inquiry into the nature of truth. But based on Vedanta, all other texts have come. We have got our Smritis, Itihasa, Purana, etc. They have all come in the light of Vedanta only. Itihasa Purana Bhyam Vedam Samupa Brahmayet. Whatever Dharma is told in the Veda, that has to be propagated, that has to be preserved in the form of Itihasa and Purana. So in the Itihasas, what do they say? For example, Mahabharata says, yes, you have to fight. And after all, what is the crux of Gita also? Gita was told by a warrior to another warrior. And he told Vedanta. And why did he tell Vedanta? Because he was giving a big picture to Arjuna about what is Swadharma. Because if you may read Mahabharata, there was a lot of discussion. Prior to war also, there was a lot of a very detailed discussion about the consequences of war and how they are going to be, even the winner is almost a loser, etc., etc. All that discussion was there. But again, Arjuna has a doubt at the battlefield. So at the battlefield, again, Krishna has to give him a big picture for the entire thing. So Dharmaraja did not have that doubt because Dharmaraja knew what was Swadharma. Whereas Arjuna, he faltered on that particular point. So we are supposed to fight in the sense that any sort of this false propaganda, etc., what we are seeing, we have to also counter. We have to counter. And I usually tell about what is called a two-line theory. In Telugu, we have got a proverb called a proverb. If you want to make a line short, suppose there is a line, and if you want to make a line short, you have to draw a bigger line. So suppose they are making some propaganda, we have to produce more literature. We have to produce more literature, more number of people. We in fact, the basic tragedy is most of us are not studying. An ordinary Christian, he has Bible in his hand. An ordinary Muslim, he definitely studies Quran. But an ordinary Hindu never studies the Bhagavad Gita. He never knows what is there in the Gita. So that is the tragedy. So we have to rectify our own say mistakes. First of all, our own system, our own religious leaders, etc. We have to see that we have to see how to rectify these mistakes. We should know what is actually our core philosophy. As I said, this Vedanta, if it is brought to the mainstream, and in fact, many people in the West, they also know it by now. They also know that Vedanta is very, very strong. And many Western thinkers, not only old thinkers, even today, they are moving towards Vedanta and also Buddhism. So that is what we see. Many people, they are attracted towards Vedanta. So it is for us to study and propagate. Apart from that, I don't see any easier way.
One final question. Uh, you just spoke about how it is necessary to mainstream Vedanta and Vedantic philosophy. And in a sense, we have been seeing this mainstreaming from the last 150 to 100 years with Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and then a host of Vedanta teachers of different sampradayas. But today, in the academia, especially the Western academia, there has been an attempt to brand Vivekananda and all other modern Vedanta gurus as new Vedanta, in the sense of uh, they they have used certain tenets of traditional Vedanta, but they have twisted it and kind of it is not the authentic Vedanta. In a sense, they are trying to discredit the entire this Vedantic modern Vedantic movement by saying that they have it is a new thing. It is not connected to the ancient tradition of Vedanta. So, can you shed light on this and what is your
Yeah, what we can say is they are they are taking advantage of our ignorance. That is what I can say. Vivekananda, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, and all these modern philosophers, they have never deviated from our Vedantic tradition. What Vivekananda said is every word from Upanishads. What Nisargadatta Maharaj or Ramana Maharshi or some other people or these Ramakrishna Mission Swamijis, they are saying every word of it is from our Upanishads. They are not saying anything new. And if we read Mahabharata, Mahabharata is a sort of bridge between Vedanta and the common man, Vedanta and the society, because you read Vedanta not for itself. You read Vedanta for Atmajnana and all that, it is okay. But then Vedanta also has to help the people. And Vedanta, as I said just now, this Swadharma, you have to fight for Swadharma. So Vivekananda and all these Ramakrishna Mission people and all these people, it is not Neo Vedanta. Whatever they have done is what Dharmaraja has done, what Arjuna has done, what Krishna told in the Gita. So it is not something new or anything like that. Probably these Western people trying to take advantage of our ignorance, because many of our people, they are not studying Vedanta. So we have to not only study Vedanta, we should also study texts like Mahabharata. Apart from Ramayana, in fact, I gave talks on Ramayana also. Now I am studying this Mahabharata. In fact, I now feel that it is a great, mistake that we have not studied Mahabharata enough. So Mahabharata it looks like a sort of elaboration on the Gita. Lot many passages in Mahabharata, they look like an elaboration on the Gita, a commentary on the Gita. So what our modern Swamijis have done, they have not done anything, they have not twisted or they have not done anything. They have only applied that Vedanta to the whatever present day problems are there, just like Dharmaraja did, just like Lord Krishna did. So that is what they did.
okay? On Neo Vedanta, just one more question. This term is highly has taken a life of its own in a sense. One was the kind of usage we just discussed, and another is today a lot of people, new age movements, and all these new trends, especially in the West, but even in India, uh, they tend to teach Advaita, but they do not follow the traditional method of teaching of Advaita. They do not, for example, they say it's only think about the knowledge, the but all everything else, the methodology, the process given in the traditional shastras to attain that knowledge is not needed. That is chitta shuddhi and all this is not needed. Just you think that I am everything, then that is okay. I mean, we see this trend a lot in a lot of people today speaking about Vedanta online. A lot of this new Vedanta, new age movements. Uh, uh, what is your comments on?
I don't know. I don't know much about this New Age Vedanta because I have not listened to any of those talks. But from what you say, maybe even that has some advantage because even the New Age Vedanta, if they really read the text of Vedanta, and even if they do not bother for Chitta Shuddhi, at some point of time they will feel guilty and then they will come back to that original method. That's what I feel. Even if they feel okay, Chitta Shuddhi is not needed. Okay, you can have some bottle of scotch in one hand and then read Upanishad in the other hand. But after some time, the fellow may feel guilty. After some time, at least he will see, oh, this is what it is. So okay, we can accept it. There are so many persons who are erratic. So that is also one erratic strand. We need not bother to fight everybody.
Okay, on that positive note, um, very thank you for this wonderful talk, Arvindaji, and for this lengthy discussion and
Thank you, Nitinji. Thank you.
answering all the questions.
Thank you for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks one and all.